Okay, back from our break. Let's hit it. All right, so we go through this again. Serpent, dragon, snake equals worm. That's the word in the Hebrew. All right, now let's go back to chapter 14. Now we talked about all of this. We brought up the worms. Now listen what he says after he speaks about the worms. The next verse after it says, and I'll read 11 again. Chapter 14, verse 11, thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy viols, the worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. Now look what it says next. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? Wow. He goes from talking about a worm to talking about Lucifer, who is a Satan, maybe the chief Satan, the number one enemy, the real accuser that stands before the throne of God, pointing his finger at us, and the Messiah goes, no, 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 no. That's one of mine. Get out of here. That's pretty much the way it goes. In my vernacular, fine, okay? If you're from Jersey, you understand. In the vernacular of the Bible, we know what it says. We see what it says in Revelation. So he goes from speaking about worm and worms right to here. Now, listen. Weakening the nations. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation, the Mount of Olives. I don't think so. In the sides of the north, which is the northern kingdom, Judah. All right. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I'll be like the Most High. Where did we last hear that? Oh, you can be like God. That serpent, that worm, that lowly creature was able to somehow Shylock Eve, who Shylocked Adam, and they were all found to be owing and doing in a bad way. Look what he says. I will be like the Most High. It's the same lie. It's the same lie. Okay? Now we read on. In verse 15, yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. And in verse 16, they that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee, like, give you that look like, what? And consider thee, and they'll say, is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that shook the kingdoms? This worm? Lucifer is considered is the enemy. Is the enemy. It was the enemy that filled the worm snake. Let's say that's the one that was there. I have no reason to believe it was anything different, because history and thousands of years later has proved out that this thing is indigenous to that area. Bottom line. And then he goes on to say, that made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of his prisoners. All the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, every one in his own house. Sounds an awful lot like Revelation. But thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch, and as the raiment of those that are slain, thrust through with a sword, that go down to the stones of the pit, as a carcass trodden under feet. Thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed thy land, and slain thy people. The seed of evildoers shall never be removed. The seed. The bad part of us. The Satan part. That we are the enemy. We are our own worst enemies. Who was it that said, we looked to find the enemy and we saw that the enemy was us? Same thing happening in the world and in this country today. But on a personal level, here it is. The seed of evildoers. Prepare slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. Now he's speaking also to Israel and to others, and mostly Israel's enemies primarily. Israel has their own part in this. Jerusalem is mentioned, all right? And he says, I will rise up against them, saith the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and the remnant and the son and the nephew of all of them, saith the Lord. I will make it a possession for the bittern and the pools of water, and I will sweep it with a besom. A sweep, it's a dust mop, okay, of destruction. I'm going to sweep this evil out of the land that I created. I'm going to sweep this evil of these nations that are enemies of God and enemies of the people. Satan. You like what's coming, Lucifer? You better get ready. Okay. Now, let's just take a little diversion for a second, and we'll talk about worms again. But we're going to talk about it in a real practical sense and in a scientific sense. I like to make sure that we're not out there in the stratosphere somewhere. Now, it's a wide sweep. Pigs and worms. What do they got to do with each other? Well, this is science, and this is easily proven. All right? 75% of all diseases known to man come from pigs, worms, and parasites. Don't get it wrong, because you got to reconcile this. They're an unclean animal. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's go back and get another little wake-up call. In Genesis, when Noah built the ark, the cute little story that we've been told since childhood is, and all the animals marched onto the ark two by two, right? Right? That's not what Scripture says. Not even close. What it says is that the animals, the clean went in by sevens, and the unclean 2 by 2. 2 unclean for every 7 clean. There's a designation. You want to know what the designation is? Go to Leviticus and look it up. God tells you what food is and what food isn't. So we have a problem today. But the problem gets a little bit nastier, okay, when you start to really look at what's going on. All flus, every last one of them, except one, comes from a pig. By the way, you can cook a pig at 800 degrees and it'll kill off some of the worms. But there's a ton of them that cannot be killed by any heat or incarceration at all. I mean, incineration, not incarceration, incineration. All right? That's fact. So you have all these parasites, germs, and worms inside these beasts because that's their job as unclean animals, is to be scavengers, to eat anything. If you fall in a pig pen by mistake and they're eating corn, you fall in, guess who's getting eaten? You are. In Florida, they release them to eat snakes all over the field, all the poisonous snakes. They release pigs to get them. And if you look at the pig and you look at his hoof, whatever they call it, it oozes pus. That's how it gets out of them, the system. And when you eat it, your white blood cell count goes up. Your white blood cell count goes up. All right, the macrophages are fighting what they perceive to be an invading parasite, something that don't belong there, a poison. These are all facts, like it or not. I don't really care if you like it. We don't have to like it. You just have to learn it and protect yourself in many ways. So these pigs, by the way, all flus come from a certain country in East Asia that we don't have to even name. And don't give me anything about the Spanish flu. That was only named because Spain remained neutral in the war. And any further inflammation about that nation would have been really, really bad, because it would have just fueled up Japan to do even more atrocities to those people. But these are facts. Now, when you add that to the fact that the same country owns all, if not pretty much all, 99% or more, or all, I think, of the pork farms, processing plants, everything, including the famed Smithfield hams in Virginia, are all owned by that country. So now they own all the pigs. They're going to feed them to us. The pigs that they got, every pig is where a flu comes from, and all the flus come from that one place. To me, it just looks like it's a mess. It's a nonsense. So and then you say, well, that's for the... No. All right? Why would the Messiah let these pigs go over a mountainside? Well, let's take a look at chapter 5 of the book of Mark. And I think we're going to hear some things that are going to be pretty instructive for us. Okay? So, Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. They came over to the other side of the sea into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tomb a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, and no, not with chains. They couldn't contain this guy. He's a maniac. He had been so often bound with fetters and chains, and he broke them and plucked asunder and in pieces, and no man could tame him. He had brute demonic strength. And always night and day he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying, cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Messiah, Yeshua, afar off, he ran and he worshipped him. And he cried with a loud voice, he cried, and he said, What have I to do with thee, O Yeshua, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God, that thou torment me not. Don't break my chops. And then he said unto him, Messiah said, Come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And he asked him, What is thy name? And the spirit answered him and said, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. So what did he do? All right. Now there was there near unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. Get this now, because it is slick. And all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And then forthwith Yeshua gave them leave, and he did exactly what he asked. And the unclean spirits went out, entered into the swine, and then the herd ran violently down a steep place unto the sea. There were about 2,000 of them, and they were all choked in the sea. They drowned. And they came to Yeshua to see him, that was the person that was possessed with the devil and had the legion sitting and clothed. He was clothed. This guy used to run around naked. He was clothed and in his right mind, and they got scared. It says they were afraid. And they that saw it told them how it befell to him that was possessed with this devil, and how what happened with the swine. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coast. They wanted him out of there. When he was come unto the ship, and that he had been possessed by the devil, prayed him that he might be with him. Howbeit that Yeshua suffered him not. But he said to him, Go home to your friends, tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on ye. And he departed, and he began to publish in Decapolis, a big, great city like New York, how great things the Yeshua had done for him. And all men marveled. So he took an unclean spirit. What did he put it? He put it in the pigs. Thought that they would live in the pigs. Something else happened. So he said, oh yeah, huh? You want to go in the pigs? No problem. Now people criticize, people that don't understand that that stuff's not food. They say, well, why would Jesus do such a thing? That was terrible. They were a poor little village. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but they were unclean. They were not used to eat. Okay? Whatever reason that particular herd was there, it could have been wild. Who knows? You got to recognize things, you know. Pigs, wild, dogs, our beloved puppy dogs, okay? They, in the Middle East, they still kill dogs. People, you know, that are involved in certain religions in the Middle East, they'll kill your dog if you're next door. To be called a dog, there's only one thing worse, and that's to be called a pig in the Middle East, because the dogs were not the friendly little cuddly little cutie petsy pies that we have here in the United States and other places. They ran in packs. They were wild. They ate Jezebel, for crying out loud. They terrorized the neighborhood. They ran in packs. To be called a dog, a scavenger, the one that eats bodies and garbage, not a good thing. So we've got to get our head right and understand everything in the context of where it was written and how and why. So we have that section of Scripture. There's also the same rendition in Luke chapter 26, verse 39. And again, to show the harmony, let's just take a look at Luke 26. I think, did I say Luke 26? No, Luke 8, I'm sorry. Luke 8, verse 26. All right? And we are almost there. So chapter 8, verses 26 to 39. All right? And they arrived in the country. The same story comes out. And they asked Yeshua, what is thy name? He asks him about it. He says, it's Legion. And, you know, they besought him, these demons, that they would not command them to go out into the deep. But there was a herd of swine. See, this is a little different twist, and this is the slick part. He's saying, please don't throw us, don't cast us out of this man and throw us in the sea. So what did he do? Listen, he put them in the pigs. And the pigs ran over the sea. He didn't do it. Pigs did. They couldn't contain themselves. And though they're unclean, there was no purpose for them. They weren't going to be eaten. Not by those people. So how slick that was. Please don't throw us in the sea. No, I ain't going to throw you in the sea. I'm going to put you in the pigs. Oh, okay, that's cool. And then the pigs jump off the building, off the side of the mountain, and they wind up choking in the water and dying. So you got to look at this stuff for what it is. This is not simple, easy stuff. It is to understand it when the practical nature of it and the reality of it, of what it really says, comes out. It does then becomes quite easy. Okay? So bottom line is, all these pigs died because he outsmarted the demons. Gave them exactly what they wanted. You got to be careful what you ask for. All right? If you're on a path for destruction, got to be careful. All right. Now, let's take a look at verse 24 of Isaiah 14. And we're going to proceed on several chapters going forward through chapter 24. In chapter 14, verse 24, the Lord here is prophesying against Assyria. And he prophesies against Assyria in verses 24 through 27. You read it. I'm giving you the gist of what happened, and I'll tell you more about it as we go. The next group, from verses 28 to 32, are prophecies against the Philistines. Then chapter 15 starts, and they're prophecies against Moab, Edom, Moab, same thing. And he takes a break from that in chapter 16, all right? Except in verse 14, he says, but now the Lord has spoken, saying, within 3 years, as the years of a hireling, and the glory of Moab shall be condemned with all that great multitude, and the remnant shall be very small and feeble. That's also parallels Malachi 3:5, and the word small, feeble, is the same word as basically puny that we learned about. Now we go into chapter 17, and there's the entire chapter is the prophecy against Samaria. All right? Then he goes to chapter 18, and that is about the prophecies against Ethiopia. Chapter 19, the prophecies against Egypt. Chapter 20, he talks about Tartan, Ashdod, Sargon, the king of Assyria, etc. And then he goes right into chapter 21 after introducing these people and prophesies against Babylon. Okay? And then the end of chapter, let's say chapter 21, verse 11, he speaks about Edom, Duma. Edom and Moab are the same for the purposes of where we're going with this. And then the next verse in chapter 21, verse 13, there are prophecies against Arabia, Saudi Arabia. Then in chapter 22, there are prophecies against Jerusalem itself. And then finally in chapter 23, there are prophecies against Tyre and Sidon, okay, Canaan. And after that, in chapter 24, he goes on a rail to say in verse 5, all right, that the earth is defiled under the inhabitants because they have transgressed the laws, they've changed the ordinances, and they've broken the everlasting covenant. Then he goes on in verse 6, says, therefore hath the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and only a few men are left. Then he goes down to chapter 24, verse 10. He says, the city of confusion is broken down. Every house is shut up that no man can come in. There's crying for wine in the streets. All joy is darkened. The mirth of the land is done. And the city is left in desolation, and the gate is smitten with destruction. That's pretty powerful stuff. Now, we mentioned all of those places. Okay? We mentioned all of those places. And all of those places, if you've been paying attention for months now, are the same nations that conspire against Israel in the end days. The things that are going on now, there will be a betrayal. And the nation, I'll tell you what nation I believe will betray them. Their closest friend in that region. These are the same countries that are spoken of in Ezekiel chapter 38. He says Assyria, which means destroy. It was destroyed, all right? It was destroyed. Philistia, the Philistines, they were destroyed by famine, and the rest of the remnant were slain. Moab, Edom, was laid waste. Samaria, it says, was desolate and brought to desolation. Ethiopia was trodden down, overrun. Egypt, defeated. Babylon, defeated. Arabia, defeated in battle. And Tyre, laid to waste. Each of those chapters that I read when they introduced these countries, this is their fate, backed up by scriptures in the same book of Isaiah. And then I did a little study, as I usually do, about the names of those nations. And essentially, here's what it came out to say. From Assyria all the way down to the end, to Tyre, it says, what father do you have? in the wallowing plain, in the land of grief. From the watchtower, you appears like fire, and the bondage and the tribulation are married to tragedy and confusion, Babylon. That man is in the desert like a nomad, but his strength is a rock. Boy, I'll tell you, there's just so much to be seen and to understand in this. These are the same countries that will be on the attack. Tyre, by the way, is Lebanon. Lebanon has always been a close ally, and to some degree a Christian nation, more as much as it's an Islamic nation. And they say that you can only really be betrayed by a friend. Enemies don't betray you. They're the enemy. We all know who they are. So that's what those names mean. And they're the same things, the same names, all right, that are part of the configuration of nations that will come against Israel. All right. In verse 25, Israel prays for kingdom blessings after the great time of judgments within the tribulation period in chapter 24. Yes, I didn't mention that, but that's what we're talking about here. And in verse 7 it says, "And he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering that's cast over all the people and the veil that is spread over all the nations. He will swallow up death in victory, and the Lord God will wipe away the fears from all their faces, and he will take it all from the earth." And it says, "And it shall be said in that day, Lo, this is our God, and we have waited for him, and he will save us. This is the Lord that we have waited for. We will be glad and rejoice in his salvation." We will rejoice in his Yeshua. Moab, Edom will be trodden down. And then Israel in chapter 26 will sing the kingdom song, the gospel of the Messiah. The foot, in verse 6 of chapter 26, shall tread it down, even the foot of the poor and the steps of the needy. Okay? Now listen, as we come to a quick close. In verse 19 of chapter 26, "Thy dead men shall live together with my dead body, they shall arise. Awake and sing, you that dwell in the dust, for thy dew is as the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out its dead. Come, my people, and enter into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thyself, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation is passed over. For behold, the Lord comes out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. And the earth shall also disclose her blood, and shall no more cover her slain." It's some pretty heavy stuff there. All of it relates to the end times. All of it relates to the book of Revelation. All of it is coming to a head. These were prophesied 740, 750 years before the Messiah came. And here's what we have, along with the underlying message. So I hope you learned a little bit of something tonight, a little different maybe, but I told you I'll bring in science, math, astrophysics, whatever I have to bring in to prove the unity of God's word and the totality and the reality of it. Okay? So that's what we did. Next week we're going to talk about, I got a message that involves everything from murder, incest, racism, political corruption, prisons, death. Oh, it's going to be something. And it's a 5,000-year-old story. All right? But until that time, I wish you God's blessings, peace. May he who brings peace in high places bring peace to you. So until next week.